This is The Business of Architecture. Helping architects conquer the world. And here's your host, Enoch Sears.
Hey, this is Enoch, and today we're going to talk with Greg Lavadera, architect. Greg practices just outside of Philadelphia, and today he's going to tell us how he's dominated the online space for selling modern, contemporary home plans online. He's a sole practitioner, and also he's going to tell us the lessons that we can learn from the Swedish home building industry. All right, Greg, well, welcome to the Business of Architecture.
Thank you. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about who you are, and tell us a little bit about your firm, so people that say they've never heard of you before can just get a quick understanding of who's Greg.
Okay, I'm an architect practicing in the suburbs of Philadelphia. I'm in the New Jersey side of the Delaware River, about 6 miles out of the heart of Philadelphia. I practice with my wife. We started the practice together. She's an interior designer, and if you visit our website, you'll see that we talk about the integration of architecture and interior design services. And we did that for many years. Right now, my wife is running another business that we own, and so she's not active in interior design right now, but maybe possible that she does it again at some point. I have a small practice, sole proprietor. Most of my work is in light commercial and residential, new homes, additions, renovations. For the commercial work tends to be either small commercial structures or commercial interiors.
And for your architecture practice, do you find that most of your work is local there? You're meeting with local business owners. Who's the clientele that you serve?
Locally, more of my work is local homeowners. Sometimes builders I've worked with before will come to me and we'll do something together. On the commercial side, I've worked for a number of local businesses, a shopping center owner, a restaurant. There's a nonprofit organization in nearby Camden, New Jersey that I've done work with for a number of years, and very fond of their mission and try to help them as best I can while not punishing myself.
Yeah, in other words, still feeding your family.
Sure. But they're doing great things in Camden City, which is a city with a lot of problems, and they have a great mission, and I'm really thrilled when I can assist them with that. Yeah.
Yeah, and so you are sole proprietor, and how long have you been doing your own thing?
Wow. Okay, we set out. What year was it? I guess it was 1993. My wife and I left our positions. I took a temporary job with an architect close to home while she started the interior design practice. And the following year, in 1984, I joined her. So tell me, how many years is that, Enoch?
So you said 1983?
83 and 84, yeah.
Oh, wow. Well, it's 2013, so that'd be 10, 20,
20
30
years.
years. 30 years.
30?
Yeah, so the 80s, the 90s, and then the 2000s.
1993.
94. So I dated you. I added 10 years to your life there.
Yeah. 20 years is quite enough. Yeah, so that's interesting because at one point you go past this point when you start your practice. It's like, oh, wow, I've been working for myself longer than I've worked for anybody else I've ever worked for. And then you turn around one day and you're like, oh, I've worked for myself longer than I've worked for any other person all put together. All this time has gone by, and it's like you end up unemployable eventually.
Only to yourself employable, right? So what are some of the challenges? You've been doing this for 20 years. How long did you work for other firms before you set out on your own?
Well, let's see. I graduated from architecture school in 1983. So I basically worked for 10 or 11 years before we went out on our own. So, I became licensed, within the minimum amount of time. Back then, you could do it within 3 years. There was no IDP. You sort of kept your records yourself and gathered them all together right before you applied to take the licensing exam. So I got my license in 1987, continued to work for other offices, some great architects I worked for in Philadelphia. And I guess it was by, late, 1992 or so, my wife and I thought, we ought to, it's time for us to try this on our own. So,
what was the primary factor that caused you to make that decision?
I guess it was just a matter of wanting to pursue my own goals. You as you're working, you become more and more competent, and you learn the business more and more. And yet, in organizations where you might be working, they want to take advantage of your strongest skills. So you might be, working on one component of a project because you're good at it and you can get the work done quickly, which helps the firm be profitable, which is great, but yet, might not always be as rewarding for you as you'd like, because you like the other areas of practice and you want to engage in those as well. So I think that, if you want to talk about broad ideas, that's what really motivated us, is that I wanted to, expand my activities into other parts of practice that serving a role in an office didn't fulfill.
So have more well-rounded, kind of get your hands in a lot of the different pieces.
Get your hands in a lot of different pieces. Be the one responsible to set the direction, and
And during those early days, Greg, what was your one or two of your biggest challenges?
When we first started out, I felt compelled to get dressed and put on a pressed shirt and a tie and go down to the room in our house we were using as an office.
I love it.
Because I thought I just had to put on the costume to feel that I was in that mode, and that finally broke down. I never sort of regressed to working in your bunny slippers and bathrobe. And you hear people that, because there's a lot more of that sort of working at home happening, in the corporate world now. I mean, that's that whole question of how you manage your time when you're working away from the main office is a big popular question, but I never sort of fell all the way to that point. But now you see I just dress more comfortably, and I don't think I have any more of those clothes anymore that I used to wear.
So was that one of your biggest challenges?
No, I wouldn't say that was the biggest challenge. Really was finding work, getting the practice rolling. I used to always use the metaphor. I'd say, in the early days, it was like you had to push the cart every day. You had to pursue leads. You had to work on the relationships you had with people, let people know you were out there. And then as you get further along, you find that the cart is starting to roll and you have some momentum, and people remember you and come back to you. And so, you start to find that work comes to you. Yeah. Now, the upside of that is then eventually you get to a position where the cart is rolling and it's very, very hard to change the direction it's rolling in. And I sort of went through that at one point, which led to me making some changes, in the practice, and taking on some other challenges, which did in fact, sort of change the direction. And
well, that's interesting, because a lot of times we talk about when we're starting our business, we want to identify that target market so we can do the kind of work we want to do. Because ideally, all architects are doing what they love. And so it sounds like you were doing some kind of work, whatever it was, that you didn't want to do as much as other kind, and so you made a transition there?
You might say it that way. I mean, I think, you succeed at a certain kind of work. You're good at it, and the people that you're doing that work for may realize it and return to you, and you start doing more of it. And, so after a while you find wow, you're doing a lot of this kind of work, but now you're having trouble getting perhaps another kind of work. Yeah. So for me, it was at a point where I'd say I was very facile with home additions, renovations. I was getting a tremendous amount of those, from small to significant, and contractors would refer me, past clients would refer me to friends, and that's how that starts to roll. But then at the same time, I found like I was approaching clients that were interested in a new house, and I didn't have houses in my portfolio because that wasn't the kind of work I was getting and repeating. So, at one point I decide, well, I need to do something about that. I have to, get houses into, complete houses into my repertoire so that I can evidence to people that, yes, I do that. People would have, sort of gross misconceptions that, I remember a potential client saying to me once, like, "Oh, well, you're not a house architect. You don't design houses." I was like, "Whoa, what does that mean?" I've never heard. They didn't talk about that category of architects being one or the other, in architecture school. So,
Yeah.
but there's people have misconceptions, or they have their own understandings, which may or may not, be based in reality. So,
Oh, absolutely.
yeah. So that was like, that was a product of that momentum. Yeah, the practice was succeeding, but it gains momentum in a direction and actually becomes hard to turn the wheels. So
Yeah.
that's something else to be wary of.
Yeah. Now, when you were basically, what advice would you give to someone who's starting out? Someone who's starting out 20 years ago, if you were 20 years ago and, trying to get that ball rolling in the direction they want so they don't have to make a course correction later. What advice
Well,
would you give to an
yeah,
architect?
I don't know if you can really anticipate that. I mean, if you can, great. But I'm not coming from a place where that was, so easy to do that you could, get the cart to roll exactly where you wanted it from day one. I mean, when you're starting out, you want to take on work, you want to generate cash flow. If you're aspiring to a larger office and you're going to have employees, you're going to have payroll demands, and so you may or may not be in a position where you have to take work that you may not feel is ideal or desirable. Because you're going to have cash flow demands in your business. So I don't know if I have good advice as how to battle that, but I think this is something that I learned through going through it, but I think if you're conscious of it and you're watching what kind of work you're doing, and you're always aware of the need to diversify or to put the practice into other situations, then I think you can, be more likely not to find yourself too far down one track or another.
You bet. Now, I found that there are certain sources in those early days, there are certain sources that are easier to find clients and sources that are not as rich. In other words, some networking or marketing activities produce more results.
Yeah.
What's your comment on that? What, in those early days, what did you find to be, I'm sure you probably found what those were and honed in on them. What were the...
Well, I mean, friends and family, brought early work. That's not uncommon. Neighbors and, acquaintances, nurturing the relationships with the builders you work with. I mean, I really can't even remember an adversarial relationship that I had with a builder, since I've had my own practice. That was not, something that would be uncommon in the practices I worked in before. I mean, they were doing public work. They were doing, work that could be difficult, and you could certainly have a conflict with a builder. But I've been tried to be really conscientious of their business and their business needs, and trying to work in a way that they can succeed. And then part of the fallout from that is that my client has a good project experience as well. So that was one of the places. The other place was with my wife Karen, working on interior design. She had very good relationships with sales reps for furniture and office systems, and this is something that exists more, I think, in interior design than does in architecture. But those sales representatives were a big part, I think, in spreading the word that we had a new practice, and some early clients came through contacts we made through them.
Nice.
So for people that are going to do interior design work, we always try to treat the sales reps well. I mean, when you're doing work with them later and, managing a furniture purchase or something like that, the last thing you want is to have, treated a sales rep shabbily that came to call on you. So, those are important relationships as well.
Okay. So what I'm hearing from you is that it sounds like that's what I would call strategic partners. Seek out people that basically have the relationships that you want to foster. So you mentioned builders. You
Hmm.
mentioned your wife who's an interior designer,
Yep.
and that was able to keep your project load full.
Yeah, those are definitely avenues for bringing work in. I don't speak this strange business language that you use, but that sounds like the right thing.
Sounds good. That's right. Basically, just people who deal with your your clients, you
Yeah.
know. And I guess that's one thing that when I talk to other architects, we're wondering, okay, if I need to go out tomorrow, say I lose my job today, I need to go out tomorrow and find work. Who's the one person I talk to? So how would you answer that question? Who would be the one person that if you lost your job, and obviously that doesn't apply, but if you did, who would be the one person you would talk to?
Well, I mean, if you weren't intending to get another job, I mean,
Yeah.
I would speak to other architects I knew, friends in the field. I mean, we also did quite a bit of work early on for other architects, either supplementing their staffing when they were low as subcontractors, and at times doing interior design services for their projects. In that sense, it was important for us to be able to present ourselves, to them, and for them to be able to present us to their clients as an interior design firm and not a competing architecture firm.
Yeah.
So having those two faces to the business sometimes, is very good because then, certainly you want to face your own clients as an architect, but at times when your client is another architect, you want to be able to face them as an interior designer, as a complementary profession rather than a competing profession.
Okay. Now, one reason why I was really excited about this particular interview, Greg, to get you on was because you definitely have I can just tell by reading your stuff, but you have an entrepreneurial sort of, it seems like you have this entrepreneurial spirit. And the reason I say that is because you look like you wear several hats. I go to your website and you have a couple different projects that you're involved in.
Yes, if you go to my website, it's divided into 4 quadrants. One is for a local practice. One is for a property management company that is established basically to manage my office space and office building. So, I mean, I could just have that and not make something out of it, but in my mind, it's better to put it forward as an entity that, it has potential to have interaction with developers and other business opportunities that wouldn't fall neatly into my practice. So I put that forward and try to use it as an opportunity for generating other business. I also have one portion of my site that's dedicated to the sort of odd venue of building houses out of shipping containers. I don't want to spend too much time on that now, but I've actually gone pretty in depth into a proposed system for that. Unfortunately, right now it just remains as a concept. I've done some design work for clients based on that, but none of them have gone through and built something. And then the last quadrant is my house plan catalog, which is where I sell house plans, very similar to the way you see other vendors sell house plans on the internet. But mine are dedicated to, well, number one, being very architecturally designed, sort of positioned as an alternative to custom design for people that wouldn't be in a position to hire an architect because it was too expensive, or at times there may just be a mental block about that, about taking that step. And then they're also very contemporary. They're sort of positioned to serve that area of the market where the housing industry really doesn't offer a great deal in the way of modern design.
Yeah, so I'd like to point out for those who are listening today, some people may know who you are, Greg, some might not, but Greg has, I would say he's acquired a little bit of fame on the internet. He's
I'm
people
internet
know who he
famous.
is. Yeah, you're internet famous because you do offer an interesting product, which is your modern online home plan designs. And so I'm excited to talk about that. So we talked about the early days of your firm. You're doing sort of the traditional architectural practice of building locally. Tell us about the pivotal moment when you thought, hey, I'm going to start doing this on the internet. I'm going to start offering online plans.
Okay, well, this keys into the story that we were into a little earlier about, feeling this need to change the direction that my practice was going in. So it sort of came about when I got a advertisement for this Dwell magazine in the mail. They must have, scoured the email lists or purchased an email list of architects all over the country. I got this postcard and I said, oh, that looks interesting. And I subscribed, not really thinking too hard about it. And it came and it was like, oh, this is like, what do they call them? Shelter magazines? Is the sort of the, so this was a shelter magazine aimed strictly at modern houses. And I was like, wow, that's incredible. I said, I'm going to subscribe to this. I'll probably only get it for a year because it's going to go down the tubes. I love the houses I saw in there, and in my local practice, I set out to, to please the client, to design something that's compatible with their house. If they're interested in something, modern or contemporary, I'm thrilled about that. I love modern design. A lot of architects that come out of their training with that, preference, but it's not very popular in the market, or so we believe. So I quickly realized with this tremendous success of that magazine that there are actually lots of people out there that like modern design, and the opinions I'm seeing expressed from them is where do I find that kind of house? I can't go out and buy that kind of house. So I thought, well, you can just get house plans, can't you? And so I started this like, it was like a 4-day long internet search where I visited literally hundreds of websites, or well, maybe tens of websites, and looked at literally thousands of plans looking for modern house designs. And there were some out there. Granted, a lot of these plan vendors sell house plans in their catalog that have probably been in their catalog since 1955. And you can tell when you look at them, you can tell by the style of the rendering that they present. But, they eventually age out. The structure doesn't meet today's standards, so they actually, slowly weed them out of the collection. So I realized, here's the sort of the most common denominator in the United States. We're sort of unique that we have this industry for publishing house plans that people buy and then take to their builder that doesn't really exist anywhere else in the world. And we didn't really have any modern design. So at that point, I resolved that I was going to make modern house plans of designs that I liked and thought were modern, and I was going to, make my own website. I didn't like the way house plans were marketed. You never knew who the designer was. They were anonymous. I thought, you should know who the author is. That should be part of what, the buyer is interested in. Just the same way you have brands of cars, and the brands of cars have different reputations, the house designs should be similar. But you would see, you'd have these bottomless pits of mediocre house designs, and they were indistinguishable. You don't know who designed them. They don't tell you who designed them. They don't tell you any story about what is nice about the design, where the idea for the design came from. They give you the floor plans, and they give you one pretty drawing of the front of the house, very shallow amount of information. Somebody looking at those floor plans really doesn't have any idea of what the inside of the house might look like. You can't, unless you happen to be adept at reading a plan and envisioning a 3D space, like an architect, you really can't tell what you're buying. So here I set out, I had, a mission that number one, was going to make modern plans for people that couldn't find a house or couldn't find a house plan of a modern house. I wanted to offer them more information so that they could see what the house looked like on not just the front from the street, but all 4 sides, if it had 4 sides, and see what the house looked like inside, what it's like to stand in the house and, look into the rooms. So I wanted to do better than the house plan industry was doing, give the consumer more information, give them the story about what the design was about and what it meant, and then try to serve this niche market that was being ignored.
Okay, so I'm going to break this down really quick here. So for starters, you found a need You found a very specific need. So you saw the need before you created something. It wasn't like you went out and said, you know what, the world needs modern house plans. I'm going to start offering them online. You actually saw people asking the question.
I did.
For one,
I
right?
was participating on Dwell's online community, their message
Okay.
board, and that's where I picked up firsthand that message.
Okay. I think that's an important point for architects that want to get their hands in something else, is being part of communities, talking to other people, being on social media. It might not have an obvious benefit at the beginning, but what it can do, I've seen, and it sounds like you're telling us too, it provided you to understand a need that wasn't being fulfilled.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, at times we can be hesitant about speaking out loud in public. I know a lot of architects that seemed really hesitant to, post opinions online, about design or anything. And I suppose there is some risk to that. I mean, there's always many different opinions out there, and favoring one opinion can alienate another. But I haven't found there really to be any bad fallout from, taking a position on something that is an interesting, subject to have a dialogue about, like design.
Yeah. So how hard was it? So you had the idea. You said, okay, I want to do these modern house plans. And then you're faced, to me, it seems like an enormous task. You're not a web designer. How do you get a website up? How do you start selling those? How do you do your payment processing? How hard was it to figure that kind of stuff out?
Well, it wasn't easy. It wasn't impossible, but I'd say that the end result is that it was more important to go ahead and do it than it was to do it absolutely fantastically right at the start. Does that make any sense?
You bet it does.
So I probably spent a year working on the first designs and getting the first set of construction documents prepared. Now, like everybody else, I have a full-time job, so this was work I was doing in the evening when you might otherwise be pursuing, personal interests or luckily I could do it and spend time with my family. I would do it on the laptop, in the living room in the evening. But yeah, it took a lot of extra work to create that. And you mentioned the website. Yes, I had very rudimentary, skills with HTML.
And what did you custom hand code your website with HTML? Is that how you built it?
I did. The first one I did.
Okay.
And it was okay. It worked, but it wasn't particularly professional looking, and it's been updated since then, and it looks much, much better now, although still perhaps lacks the edge that you would get from working with a professional web designer. But, my own web skills have come up. In the second version, I created a template using a free web page builder that came on my computer. And then instead of really coding the whole site in that template, in that software, I created a page template that then I ended up manually coding. So,
okay. And what's that modern design house plan site so people can go check that out?
Well, it would be lammydesign.com, which is my URL for all my sites, and appended onto the end /plans.
Okay.
And that will land you at the homepage of my catalog. Yeah.
Okay.
So,
and you have a number of, how many houses are you up to now in your catalog?
Good question.
I mean, are we talking 10, 20, 50?
It's between 15 and 20, I think. I don't recall exactly.
Okay. Okay.
I should know that, shouldn't I? Yeah, there's some houses, there's like several versions of the house that's very similar. For instance, one design, there's one that is steel frame, there's one that's a wood frame. So, so there's multiples of that, but those variations came more easily than creating a new plan from scratch.
Well, one thing I see, and I definitely have to say about your homes, that I personally love the aesthetic of your buildings, and I love the homes. They seem to have a lot of integrity in the materials, a very contemporary modern design. I know that it's not what every architect likes, but I think that you do have some exceptional design. So
thank you.
I hope others
It's
get an
very
opportunity
kind
to
of
check it
you
out.
coming from another architect.
That's what we all look for, right?
Within the house designs, I mean, I have to say that I've deliberately tried to treat them as a brand. I mean, the same way that you would look at, a Mercedes-Benz has a distinctive grille and something that you recognize in all their models. BMW, they all have what do they call the kidney grills. So the house designs share some common elements that you can pick out in house to house. Some of it is the pattern of the way window units are put together to make larger windows. Others are the details of an overhang or the way a front porch is added onto a house. And so those all elements sort of become design building blocks, and a wide range of houses then are built up out of those parts. But the houses are all of a family. When you look at one and look at another, you can say, oh yeah, I mean, you see how they hang together. Now, within that, I've gone past now, I've started to create different collections where I can sort of expand the variety, because of course architect, I get bored with pursuing one kind of design theme. And so this is the way that I'm branching out. So there's what I call the original collection, which were the house designs that I launched the site with, and I've expanded since then. And then I have new collection, which I call the X-House collection. There's a little story behind that, which is on the website. I won't give you that right now, but again, building a story around the designs is an important part of it, because you want people to have something to connect to, not just looking at the plan visually, but have some understanding of what the intentions were. So the X-House collection is just about responding more to what I see as some contemporary design trends that I see in houses, when I'm perusing magazines and websites on design. So this was a collection that it allowed me some latitude to break out of the design language of the first house plans. Yeah. And then I have another collection, which is not really started yet, but is fleshed out in the site, which is I call the Blueprints collection. And this is sort of feeds my own nostalgia about mid-century modern houses from the 1950s. So this is going to be a set of designs that are sort of retro and appeal to people that like authentic mid-century modern houses more so than contemporary modern houses. So I'm way behind my agenda in fleshing that out, but I actually can't wait to work on that, because it's sort of like indulging in a personal interest by creating those. Yeah. So.
Well, and Greg, one thing I know, my expertise is web marketing and basically how to, internet tools and such. And I know that there's a lot of people out there that start something on the internet, they make a website, they'll put up some house plans, and they're like, all right, this is the best thing since sliced bread. And then days roll by and months roll by and no one ever visits the website. So I know just like I know, that all the work is actually in the promotion and getting people to find you on the web.
The promotion, but also, a big part of it is simply getting the product up there. When I launched, I had one plan offered. And the odds of finding somebody that is interested in that one plan become astronomically, large against you until you have more designs up there. So I probably had 4 or 5 designs complete before I sold my first set of plans. And
what was that moment like? Let's stop for a second. Tell me about that moment.
Well, the first set that sold didn't get built. Okay. And honestly, of course, a lot of that happens. People buy plans, and for whatever reason, their project falls through, something in their life changes. So that's not uncommon. It's also not uncommon to sell a set of house plans and they disappear into the ether and you never hear from the people again and you have no idea what happened. And so this is sort of a level of disconnect that architects are not accustomed to. And this is something that is in the nature of the house plan business. And I would say is actually a very healthy experience for architects, because it helps you build a detachment and the ability to be objective about it. So the first one did not sell. That one sold probably pretty quickly after the site was launched. The first one that sold and went into construction was, I guess it was 2004, which is about 3 years after the site launched. So you have to be, steadfast. I mean, you put the site up, you're putting a tremendous amount of time into putting product up there, and it takes a while for people to find you. There's a segment of customers that will be doubtful and would not buy unless they saw that a house had been built from this crazy person selling plans. So once the houses started being built, and I was showing evidence of that on my blog and cataloging the photographs that customers were turning, then it's like the dam breaks, and now you have a lot of customers, and there's houses being built all over the country. So
Yeah. And
yeah.
how do you find that people are finding you? Are they, let's say, Google? Is it through forums? Is it through outreach that you do? What is it that, is there one particular source that's greater than others?
Typically it will be somebody looking for a house design and Googling for house plans. Now, they may have, different tastes and aren't finding what they like on, the mass marketed house plan sites, or they may use, as a result of that, may use a search term that is a little bit more unusual. For instance, you can go in and see the search terms that brings people to your house, to your site, if you're using Google Analytics. So you start to get an idea of what kinds of things people are thinking about that eventually bring them to your site. So you get people searching for modern house designs, modern house plans, contemporary house plans, cube house plans. For some reason, that's a term that comes up very frequently.
Interesting. Can I stop there just for a second? I find that interesting because I know what I find with what people search for a lot of times, because we're trained architects, the language we use is different than the layman. And so that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that. If I was a layman, I might not even know the word modern architecture.
Yep.
I might
People
just
use
say I
terms
wanted a
like
cube house.
box house, Lego house. You see terms like that. So, of course, that led me to have a design on my site that's called the Cube House.
Awesome.
because of course, and that was a perfect excuse to, conceive of a very boxy house. And of course, that garners a certain amount of web hits just because of the name. And that may not be somebody might not really be looking for a house shaped like a cube, but that term of a cube house means something to them. So,
well, that is a very subtle marketing technique that I think those who are listening to this, if they want to sell something online or want to be found online, they should take note, because what you're telling us, if I can just rephrase, is that there's certain maybe obscure terms that people might search for where there's not a lot of competition. If you can find out what those are and produce something that matches that term, then people will find you.
Right. Or you can take terms that you see repeating, and you can put them right into the meta data at the head of your website, and then again, that will increase the number of hits that you get. So now, don't get the impression that I'm some kind of web guru, because I know very little about this. It's only,
well, you know what, and it's funny, Greg, because you and I started about the same time in the early 90s with the internet and making web pages. And back then, yes, it was all hand coding. You had to write the HTML tags, you put in the metadata. Today, it's progressed so far that I can basically give someone, or anyone could go get a website that 10 years ago would have cost $5,000. You can have one for $30, And so that information is one thing that I provide on my website, is showing people how they can set up a professional-looking website that includes all of those things you talked about: Google Analytics, social media profiles, testimonials, even the ability to sell stuff online. It's so easy now.
Yeah, I have a little bit of a unique problem. Is if I upgrade to a sort of modern website platform, I'm going to forgo a lot of standing links back to my site that are out on the internet. Now, a friend of mine who's a web programmer told me that there's something called a redirect table that essentially is a place where page calls that have no corresponding web page will land. It will look up where it should send you instead. So there is a way that you can sort of correct the change in URLs for a newly formatted website and retain all your past links. but that's just something I haven't figured out how to do yet.
Well, hey, I'll tell you what, we can talk about this later, you and I. But yeah, it's called a redirect, and you can set that up very, very simply. And what you're referring to is the juice. We call it the search juice or something, the traffic, because all those links provide juice to your website. So
Right. You don't want to just cut those off and throw them to the wind.
that would be throwing out years and years of hard work, as you
Right. So
know.
that's why that sort of the sort of mediocre structure I gave to the website early on is still there in the bones of my site because you want those URLs to still work. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, so I mean, the modern house plans, you found success with that. People are building them. I've looked on your blog. You have amazing construction photos where people can see these different modern contemporary houses being built.
yeah,
And so that's I mean, that's cool.
it is.
You
It's
know, I
great. And
mean, you're
that
getting to do
this was
fun
sort
work.
of the change in the direction of my practice that I was looking for when I came to that conclusion that the cart was rolling out of control, and in that regard it's been very successful. I can certainly represent to potential clients that I am now a house architect. I have a large body of houses not only built in my region, but all over the country, which has also been, another interesting aspect of doing the house plans is that it's expanded my practice to being nationwide, at least at some level, because yes, I will, sell house plans off to somebody, in the other side of the country, but I will also have people that want to have the plans modified, some of them very significantly. And so that becomes a project that I'm doing, in another part of the country.
You
So
bet.
also was a great fallout from doing the house plans, and one I didn't actually anticipate when I set out to do it.
Well, and one thing that's attractive about your model, and most architects get this, is that you're selling a product, which is very different. You ventured into a different market than we're
Yeah,
service-oriented people. You're now
right.
offering a product. Has that worked out for you? I mean, is this something you would suggest other architects look into?
Well, honestly, I think it's a very interesting aspect of design, and just as you're characterizing it, designing a product is a completely different exercise than designing a custom house. You know, there are people that believe, architects that believe that architecture has a site, and that the house is a response to that site and that client and their programmatic needs, and which is great, but that attitude has landed architects in 3% of all the housing that's built in the United States. So it's not necessarily the way housing is really done in the United States. Housing is, like many other things, is done as a product, which means that you are, as a designer, you're making assumptions or presumptions about who the client is, who the user is, what their needs are. So it's a much different and in many ways a very interesting design problem that you don't engage the same way when you're doing a custom design. Now, that doesn't take anything away from doing a custom design, getting inside your client's head and doing a good job at providing what they need, what they might not have even realized they need. But it's as treating houses as a product design is another discipline and another design problem that is also incredibly fascinating and something
So
that
you've
I've really enjoyed.
has it financially worked out for you? I mean, I'm going to give you an example. So there's other architects out there that have products, like Michael Graves did a product line with Target, right, where he's using his design skills, and it doesn't need to be house plans. It could be
Right.
anything that you're selling. I know architects sell all sorts of stuff. What would you say about the product business? Is it worth the time and effort?
Well, I mean, selling products the way Michael Graves, he's doing that. He's doing the design work. Somebody else is producing and taking care of all of the headaches of manufacturing. That's different. Doing house plans is a little bit closer to your practice. When somebody comes to you and wants to modify the house plan, well, now you're right back in the practice of custom design. So, I mean, how's it worked out? How's it been financially? I say up until 2008, we just sort of box out the recent housing economy. I said, between the time I started and the time that housing sort of ground to a halt, that the work associated with the house plans had become about 50% of my practice, either just the selling of house plans, creating new products, doing modifications and customization for customers, which was fantastic. It allowed me to sort of become a little bit more selective about the work I took in my local practice. So, at the same time I had work that I was, really interested in and enjoying coming in through the house plan side, I was also able to sort of, have the latitude to be a little bit more directive with my local practice, and the kind of work I was doing there was really the best of both worlds.
Absolutely. Well, and I've noticed too that this has actually opened up, you're passionate also about the role of the architect in residential design. I mean, you mentioned the statistic that I think you said 3% of houses are designed by architects. The great majority of the housing stock in America is created by drafters and home builders. And obviously there's some issues that go along with that all of us architects sort of realize in terms of the housing stock.
Sadly, a lot of them are also designed by architects that make the houses look just like the ones that are being designed by draftsmen and builders. That's a cheap shot. I'm sorry. I apologize, you architects working in those positions.
They can address the hate mail to enoch@businessofarchitecture.com.
Well, I mean, I think that sentiment is really common among architects, is that, we could design so much better, houses that look so much better, and the built environment would be so much nicer. And it's true, but this is where you get down to the question of doing housing as a product or as a custom service. I mean, the housing industry runs on pre-existing designs, house plan designs, and the biggest developers will have in-house staff and will be creating their own designs. But there's no easy way to insert into the economy of that industry that we're going to start paying architects 10 or 15% of construction costs to do a custom design on it. So there's not nearly enough architects in the world to provide that much design. So the reality of the housing industry is that there are going to be houses offered as product. The question to me is, how can architects become more active in putting new design into that design flow? As I said, I became focused on modern design and trying to serve that niche market. I think that there are many other niche markets out there that aren't being served. We have a long heritage of residential building in the United States, yet if you wanted to go out and buy a new house that looked like an authentic colonial house, you really wouldn't be able to find it. You find these elaborate gabled McMansions, but nothing that sort of has the modesty and authenticity of a genuine colonial or federal style house. So there's people out there, of course, that really love that kind of home. Some of them would only buy an old authentic home, but there's many others that really like that kind of home but don't want the headaches of having a really old house either. Or they may be relocating somewhere and they have to buy a new house. So there's other niches like that. I mean, you said to me earlier, you described your own house as a California bungalow. There's thousands of fans of California bungalows. There's even a magazine in the United States dedicated to bungalows, an entire magazine that's been published for years. And so the fact that you can't go out today and buy a new authentic bungalow seems like a gigantic failing of our housing industry to tap into these niche interests. But architects can tap into them.
So, and I would say going with that, obviously we don't want anyone competing with Greg because he's number one in the modern house designs. But I think what you're pointing out here is that there are probably 100 other niches that other architects listening to could fit into.
Absolutely.
I mean, like you said, if you could create a website based around a federal style or a colonial style that was more true, that had something that's not out there. So there you go, architects. There's millions of dollars waiting for the lucky architect who wants to throw together a website.
Well, here's the thing: is that you know people will buy those plans and build those houses. Some builders will see it as a great opportunity to exploit that niche, and what will happen is then you start to have the people who are early adopters or who are fans of those houses or those house styles will be the early customers. But as they build houses, and if you are doing your job and promoting it on the internet, more people are going to see that, and they're going to say, well, why can't I get a house like that too? And why do I have to pick one of these goofy looking gabled McMansions? And so, more and more people will find they're able to do that. More and more people will see people doing that. And then, basically that's how tastes change.
That's how it works.
Right.
Now, Greg, also you've been creative in the delivery of services, right? So you've branched out and you're doing online plans. And then the same way, you've also been creative in thinking about how houses go together.
Right.
You have very strong opinions about more efficient ways of building. So let's jump into that topic, because
okay.
This is really interesting.
Well, going back to before I had my practice, the last architect I worked for was Susan Maxman Architects in Philadelphia. And I don't know if the architects out there recall, but when back in that time, she served as president of the American Institute of Architects. And during her stint as president, that was the first time the agenda of the American Institute of Architects was aimed at sustainable building. That whole culture back then was just sort of starting, but there was nothing in place like there is today. There was no LEED, there was no manufacturers marketing their materials and touting their environmental benefits. None of that existed. So we started practicing and doing projects based on that. We were researching materials, trying to make decisions about, energy and carbon content. Is this material green? Is this one green? So I was there at almost the beginning of this entering into common practice. Here many years later, practicing on my own, watching how this had manifested itself and grown in the industry, and I really wasn't sure how to address it in my own practice. I certainly believed in it. It's very rare for me to find a client that had concerns about it and was looking for that to be incorporated into their designs. But so then later on, doing the house plans, I'm part of doing the house plans was showing my customers as they built their houses, trying to show other potential customers what it's like to build a house so it's not so foreign. And during that time, I got contacted by this fellow who was living in Sweden, my friend Scott Hedges. And he said, I've been reading your website. He was a past Dwell magazine reader. And he said, prefabrication is sort of a buzzword in the United States now, and everybody's trying this crazy stuff. Well, here in Sweden, everybody's building prefabricated houses, and they're built much differently than we build there. And so we started looking at this. He was sending me photographs of pictures of houses and house construction that he was seeing in Sweden, and we were sort of unpacking it and trying to figure out how they were building their houses. As you might expect, the energy performance of their houses is exemplary. If you took a house from Sweden and put it down in Germany, where the passive house standard came from, any Swedish house on the market would probably qualify as a passive house if you moved a little bit south into Germany. The houses are all very airtight, they're highly insulated, and they're all built what we call here, architects call prefabricated. More correctly, they're built off-site and rapidly assembled on the construction site.
Sure. So they've actually taken, from reading your website, and you have an entire blog post about this, they've thrown out the 2x4s, they've thrown out the sill plates and the head plates. It's not a stick-built house.
Oh no,
right?
It is a stick-built house.
Okay.
In
and
fact,
what makes it different from a stick-built house in the U.S.? What special things make it better?
Well, how is it better? It's, first of all, the Swedes are using a much deeper stud than we use. They use commonly a 200 millimeter stud, which is about 7 7/8 inches, so like bigger than a 2x8. by our standards. They're using mineral wool insulation in that stud cavity, so that would probably be about R32 for 8 inches in mineral wool insulation. And then they're using multiple layers of construction on both sides of the wall that, number one, create thermal breaks so that the wall is more efficient, and number two, provide wiring chases so that wires don't have to penetrate the airtight barrier of the house, which facilitates them being able to easily make their houses very airtight. So
the air barriers on the warm side, so it'd be on the inside of the house?
Right. Now it's a cold
Vapor
climate
barrier.
in Sweden, more akin to like the New England in the United States. So they don't even build their houses with air conditioning. You know, we use air conditioning even in Maine. You know, it's just the way we are as Americans. But it's as far as the building science profile of the wall, it's a cold climate wall. There's a vapor control layer towards the interior.
Okay. Well, when I hear you say that, I'm thinking in my head, I'm just putting myself as a builder. I'm thinking I'm seeing dollar signs. You know, we're making these bigger studs. So you are an evangelist for this kind of building. Do you think there's a long-term benefit to building this way? How can we apply this to the States?
If we set out in the States, which we are starting to do, to build higher performance into our houses so that we use less energy, so we have greater comfort, all the reasons why we set out to increase the performance of the houses. I do believe that they are building performance in a more efficient manner than we are. We're probably in a period of wild experimentation here in the United States right now. I mean, some people are strict proponents of blown-in cellulose. It's an interesting product. Others swear by spray foam. Some people put layers of foam insulation on the outside of the house. We're all over the place. Now, in comparison, we look at how we've traditionally built. Every builder understands a Western platform framed house. They all build it roughly the same way. They know what goes in the outside, what goes in the inside. Then we look at our high performance building community, and we're all over the map trying different things. So I look to Sweden. We were building houses very similarly, up to the mid 1970s when there was a oil crisis. Are you old enough to remember gasoline lines?
Very, very. Yeah, I was pretty young.
Well, so
barely.
That passed, and what happened? We were concerned about solar energy for a while, and Jimmy Carter put solar panels in the White House, and Ronald Reagan took them off.
Yeah.
So meanwhile, in Sweden, they set up a series of incentives, and slowly over 10 years completely reinvented the way that they were building houses. And that was analyzed by a study conducted by a group of American scientists in the 1980s. And they pointed this out, like, wow, look at these guys. They're using much less energy in their houses than we are. Okay, and now another 20 years have gone by, and they've gotten even better at it. Things that they were experimenting in the 1980s are like down pat now. So we look at them, there's 30 to 40 years of experience of building high performance houses. It's just sitting there waiting for us to tap into that. They're not playing around with all these different types of techniques, sandwich panels, sprayed insulation. They've gone very linearly from what we used to do. Their houses are still built very similar to ours. They've increased the depth of the studs. They've added layers to create, we're calling a Nordic layered wall system. Yeah. And so they've brought up the performance significantly while still using all of the trades and practices that we traditionally used and are still using for the bulk of our housing. So they're using mineral wool, but the insulation is bats. They're installed in a very similar manner to the way we install insulation here. There's no need to retrain people. There's no need to engage with new and unknown subcontractors. These are all like the kinds of objections that builders might throw at, I don't want to try that new. I have to hire a guy. I've never worked with him before. How do I know he's not going to cheat me? I don't know how much time that's going to take me. I don't know how to put a price on that. You know, all of the sort of traditional objections to trying something new start to go by the wayside. Now,
Yeah.
granted, there's more layers, there's more labor, there's more material. That costs more.
Yeah.
In the end, though, what you need, though, is to be able to say that the amount of energy we're going to save out of adding this performance to the wall is going to, you know, be paid off through less cost in a given number of years, and then after that additional cost is paid off, the house is going to continue to perform better and to, you know, return more money to the owner, or we should say not spend the owner's money in just maintaining it. So
Sure. Well, it's a long-term investment. Now, I
absolutely.
know there are builders, there are developers that listen to this podcast. So here's what it boils down to, Greg, and this is I'm asking you as an expert in this field.
Okay.
Do you think there's a market for if a builder out there, he wants to differentiate himself, he wants to do something different and make some money and do something noble? Is there a market for this type of thing? Do you think it's feasible?
Yeah, there's absolutely a market. I mean, more so now today than any time in our, you know, recent history. We see, you know, the explosion of lead, how lead is used as marketing leverage to distinguish properties and projects to sell them. There's many people that are interested in the environment, and you know, they go to the grocery store, they'll pick the organic mustard just because it's there. In a similar way, if they were presented with an equal choice of buying, you know, a house that was better for the environment or a conventional house, they would likely choose the house that was better for the environment. You have to remember that in most situations, people are not presented with that choice, and so they can't choose an option that they might be more warm to.
Great. Well, I think if there's any budding entrepreneurs in the audience or any architects that want to go into building, I think we provided some really good information for a couple markets they could go into and make a killing, because
Sure.
it's all about differentiation,
Sure.
you know, offering something like that.
Yeah. So, you know, part of the reason why the Swedes are so successful with this is that they're building these walls indoors, and the United States, you know, we have the carpenters there, they frame the house, and you send them away, and then the next day the insulator comes, and then when he's done, they go away, and, you know, the drywall crew comes. And the last thing you want to do is to have some reason to call that carpenter back, or have to have the insulator make a second trip, because that will, whether there's twice the amount of work to do or not, it's going to double your costs because they're coming out to your site and spending a day at your project again. But when you build that same wall that has multiple layers and multiple layers of insulation in a factory, laying on a table instead of standing up, now suddenly the speed with which you can put the wall together is so much faster, because you don't have to lift anything. You don't have to climb up a ladder to attach something and climb back down. If the wall has a layer of insulation and then a vapor barrier and then another layer of insulation, you don't have to call the insulation subcontractor to return to the site. The guy's there. He's working at the next table. So he just comes over when that work is ready to be done again. And so they're putting much more value in the wall for much less effort. And so, you know, in Sweden, you have some people buy big houses, some people buy small houses, but all of those houses hit that same level of performance.
Okay.
So
if someone wants to run with this, Greg, would you be available to consult? Because I know you have a lot of knowledge in this area.
Well, I would love to find somebody, you know, interested in, you know, creating a house factory, you know, around those technologies. Yeah, and we certainly have the capability of helping them create that. But that's, you know, this seems like an early stage in this market in the United States for me to find somebody that's ready to do that. That would be a very, you know, far-looking entrepreneur that was ready to do that.
Is it that different? Because I know that pre-manufactured home builders right now, they usually contract with existing prefab builders, and since those existing warehouses know how to do it, is it going to be that different for them?
Well, I don't think that it's I don't think that it's so hard to do it here. I think that it's more that we have a different business model. For instance, I mean, we have large builders. They buy property, they improve the properties so that houses can be built there. They build the houses, they market them, and they sell them. Right? But they're largely hiring local subcontractors to do that construction. So they're gaining advantage from the scale of their operation, but not really from the scale of the way they build houses, because they take advantage of buying materials in large quantities in many cases, but they're not really extending that advantage all the way through the entire house building process. Now, in our country, we have off-site construction. It's more typically done as modular. Sure, your listeners are familiar. Modular, the pieces of the house come out on a trailer of a truck, the large dimension. The house is put together by lining up all these pre-assembled modules. So the business model for that in the United States is predominantly small local builders buy the houses from the factory. They complete the on-site work. They prep the foundations. When the house is placed, they complete the interior of the house and make it ready for the buyer, and they sell it to the buyer. So very different than in Sweden. In Sweden, the factories are more like our large developers. They will buy land, develop land. They will sell the houses. They will assemble the components, ship them there, and then the person on site in that case is a subcontractor, sort of the opposite of ours. They hire a subcontractor to put the house, to do that last 9 yards and put the house together on site. And finish it for the buyer, but the factory is the one that sells it to the buyer. So,
interesting.
Yeah, so it's a different business model than ours, and our large builders sort of protect themselves from the market, and most of the labor in developing and building houses that way is in your workforce, and because they're all subcontractors, they're protecting themselves from, downside of the market, having to let people go, having to hire them back. When you are operating the factory, you have those people on your payroll. But the fact is that you can build the same houses with many less people, and that sort of mitigates that risk.
Okay. Well, Greg, how do people go to find out more information about what we've covered today? Your firm, online modern house plans, and Swedish building design.
Okay. Well, from my website, lamidesign.com, you can explore the four
That's
quadrants.
L-A. Could you spell it for us?
Yeah, it's L-A-M-I design, DESIGN.com. So if you want to look at projects I've done in my local practice, you click on the upper right, and it's organized by house additions, house renovations, new houses, commercial projects. And I have some of my favorite projects posted up there. Then if you're interested in the house plans and this talk about the Swedish building, well, you can go into the house plan catalog. The link is there. You can explore the houses, look at images of the designs. There's a link on the homepage there to Flickr, where you can see a whole bunch of photos that have been sent back by customers of building their houses. If you're interested in the technology on the Swedish houses, you would go from my house plan catalog to the blog link that's there. And on the blog, there's a number of resources. There's diagrams and explanation of Swedish wall construction that has been translated to American materials. I call that USA New Wall. That came out of actually a comment from a reader who called it a new kind of wall for the USA, and I somehow ended up with that as the title. And then Swedish platform framing, which is shows how the Swedes have altered our conventional Western platform framing in order to get better performance. So there's a good deal of information about that. And if you want to sort of read the whole history of us unpacking what was different about construction there's a category in the blog called Letters from Sweden. And if you click on that, of course, the most recent posts are at the top, and you probably have to go back 4 or 5 pages to 2007 when that whole dialogue started. It's pretty deep into the blog. So there you have it.
Great. Well, thanks, Greg. Any parting words for the architects about the business of architecture?
Oh, no. You didn't tell me I'd have to have a parting words. Well, look, it's been a tough couple of years for us architects, obviously, but, it's a rewarding profession, and I'd say that the profession would benefit from us looking to diversify the way we practice, and certainly, the construction industry, and particularly the housing industry, there's pretty broad opportunities to change the status quo, and that's what I've been interested in trying to do.
All right. Thanks, Greg Lavadera, architect. Thanks for being on the show.
My pleasure. Good talking to you.
You too.
Well, that's it for today. If you like this video, please share it by clicking one of the share buttons. And to get updates when I post a new article, video, or podcast, visit businessofarchitecture.com, sign up for our email list, and I'll send you my exclusive ebook, Social Media for Architects.